I'm Dave Breakenridge, and this is Under the Dome. In a surprising turn of events, Alberta Premier Jason Kenney announced he's stepping down as leader of the United Conservative Party after party members gave him a bare majority of support in a leadership review vote. That paves the way for a leadership contest, which will feature at least a couple of familiar faces in Alberta politics. This all comes after months of campaigning by people within his own party and without that it's time for him to step aside due to his handling of the COVID pandemic and what some saw as too strict of restrictions to deal with the virus. All that today and more on Under the Dome.
I'm sorry, but friends, I truly believe that we need to move forward united. We need to put the past behind us. And our members, a large number of our members, have asked for an opportunity to clear the air through a leadership election.
My guests today are Edmonton Journal Legislature reporters. We have Ashley Joannou and Lisa Johnson. Thanks very much, both of you, for joining me after what was, I'm sure, a very hectic Wednesday evening. Just to give viewers a bit of perspective, we had waited weeks for the results of this leadership review. It was originally intended to be in person in Red Deer. It was changed to a mail-in vote. And then we waited for the mail-in ballots to come in, get validated, and then counted. And even on counting day, we were left waiting a little longer than we were told we were going to have to. And for people in the news business, you know that evening stories are always a little tricky. But at the end of it all, Returning Officer Rick Ormond, former PC cabinet minister, former leadership hopeful in the PC party, steps forward onto the live stream and announces the results of the simple basic question, do you support our leader? And in the end, Jason Kenney had the support of just 51.4% of party members. Ashley, we'll go to you first. Normally, we don't always ask you for your opinion or your reaction to things, but after weeks and weeks of hearing the Premier talk about feeling very confident in the leadership review, feeling that he was going to do very well, what was your reaction when that number was read out and you saw that the Premier had just a bare majority of support?
Is gobsmacked an appropriate word to use? I feel like
always.
A lot of people, myself included, were gobsmacked. When you spoke to people who pay attention to politics, people in the government, I think the general expectation was that he would get somewhere in the high 50s to low 60s, and then that would leave a muddy middle water of like, is that enough support for him to claim that he can govern the party? So for him to end up with 51.4 was definitely not what I was expecting.
Mm-hmm. And Lisa, when Jason Kenney stepped up to the podium to talk to supporters who were in the room, there was jubilation. There were cheers. And even when he talked about respecting the will of the members, there were a lot of cheers. And I got the sense that he potentially was going to announce that, he was going to stay on. He had talked in the lead up to this that a bare majority is considered a win, like 50% plus one. And I get the sense even the crowd felt that, because when he announced that he was stepping down as leader of the UCP, the crowd seemed generally shocked and saddened.
And that is why tonight I have informed the president of the party of my intention to step down as leader of the United Conservative Party.
What was the nature of his speech Wednesday evening? What was your takeaway in terms of what he said about the process, what he said about what the party needs to do going forward?
It was a rather short speech, and up until the sentence when he actually said, I'm going to resign, I was expecting, I think what a lot of people in that room were expecting as well, that he would stay on as leader, that he would continue to try to bolster his party and unite it, which have been his, focal points for the past couple of months, the importance of uniting the party and having a strong, unified voice for Conservatives in the province heading into the next election. So I think I was as gobsmacked as everybody else. I think maybe we owe Rick Bell a royalty for using that word. But his speech altogether was quite short, and he did skip over some of his, greatest hits, some of his accomplishments that he's proud of achieving in his term. But it was very short, and it was, I would say, truncated, and again focused still on the importance of unity and calling for party members to come together, which is been what he's been gearing towards throughout this whole leadership review campaign, right?
Mm-hmm. Ashley, you've been spending some time in the lead up to this, kind of looking back, getting a sense of how we got here. At the risk of repeating myself, how did we get here? How did we get to the point where a premier who came in like a whirlwind, united two feuding parties 5 years ago, won the government with a huge majority, and seemed to be, in the estimation of a lot of people, a skilled organizer, a skilled campaigner, kind of a rock star in conservative politics? How do we get from that to a 51.4% vote of support among members?
I think the answer to that question will depend on who you ask. I think a lot of people will have different perspectives on how we landed here. And I think that's something that people are going to be talking about for the days and weeks to come. But there are a couple of key things, I think. 2020 was a rough year globally because of the pandemic. It was also a rough year for Alberta. I'm sure everyone remembers at one point, oil prices were in the negative, which is not something we've experienced. And so that was a lot to manage. I think when Kenney started, he sold himself as this grassroots leader, someone who's going to listen to the grassroots of the party. And then when these major world events started happening, he very quickly got accused of sort of forgetting the grassroots and becoming more controlling in his management style. That's what you'll hear from a lot of his critics. And then there is, of course, the COVID component. There is a segment of the party who believes that he went too far with the COVID restrictions and that he did not handle that situation the way they wanted him to.
Mm-hmm.
Like when you think
Lisa,
about,
from your perspective, you've been at the legislature since 2019, not long after the UCP was elected. How do you feel like the last couple of years have gone for Kenney leading into this leadership review?
Yeah, I mean, and just to spin off what Ashley was saying, if you look back 3 years, if you look back 2 years to when Kenney struck his Fair Deal panel, they had a series of recommendations to try to bring more autonomy to Alberta and to fight back against Ottawa. And at the time, it was, a lot of people considered this a brilliant strategy. It's an escape valve for a lot of people in Alberta who have grievances with Ottawa, who want to see a provincial police force, for example, want to see a provincial pension plan. Whether or not those policies are followed through on, at the very least, it gave people an opportunity to discuss them, weigh the pros and cons. There was a report afterwards. And a key member of that, Drew Barnes, who was formerly a member of the UCP, also was very passionate about these issues of Western independence. And so the escape valve, I think we saw over the past couple of years, and certainly through COVID, turned into a bit of a screaming kettle. And at some point became a little bit out of control for Kenney. Obviously, as the pandemic debate raged on, a lot of his members became critical of his pandemic approach. We saw Todd Lowen and Drew Barnes booted from the UCP caucus to become independents. And we saw plenty of UCP backbenchers stepping up to say, I don't agree with the direction this government is going in terms of public health restrictions. So that is certainly a big factor. When you factor in a lot of the complaints that constituency associations had, and a lot of, I think, a lot of these UCP MLAs constituents had that they were bringing forward to the party, and they felt like they weren't being listened to, I think it just compounded and snowballed. And at a certain point, those feelings become impossible to fix with facts or with, and not to suggest that they're not working with the facts, but they become impossible to fix.
Mm-hmm. Now, that kind of brings me to my next question. Premier Kenney announced Wednesday evening he was resigning, or he's going to be submitting his resignation as leader of the UCP. But there wasn't an indication of when he may be resigning as premier. I mean, right now, as it would as logic would dictate, he would step down, the party would elect or select from caucus an interim leader, and then they'd go into a leadership race. We didn't necessarily get a clear answer Wednesday evening about whether that would be the step that is taken or if Kenney would stay on until a leadership race is complete. And I know as we're recording this, caucus is meeting in Calgary today, being Thursday. And so there could be developments that happen. But do we get a sense, Ashley or Lisa, when the premier could say, okay, I'm going to step away now as leader of the province?
That's the big question that I have, and that I think a lot of people have. If you listen to what he said during his very short speech where he announced he was going to resign, he never actually said that the party wanted a new leader. What he said was that the party wanted a leadership race. And reading between the lines, I think it's entirely possible that Jason Kenney will run in the leadership race whenever that happens. And that creates a whole host of other questions in terms of maybe he won't give up the premiership, or maybe he will try to hang on as premier until that leadership race is over. I think that the meeting that's happening, the caucus meeting that's happening in Calgary right now, will hopefully answer a lot of those questions. I think the premier was supposed to have a press conference today. We were told that he would be available to the media today. I don't know if that's still going to happen. We haven't heard. But there are certainly a whole pile of questions that he needs to answer.
Mm-hmm. And Lisa, looking at the landscape for Alberta politics right now, we are roughly 1 year away from the next election, the next fixed election date, although I know it's fixed in name only in a lot of ways, but it's supposed to be May 23rd of next year. We're recording this on May 19th. So just a little over 1 year until the next election. What's next in the process for the UCP? How quickly does the party have to call a leadership race? And when could we see that take place?
I mean, if you thought Alberta politics were dramatic and unstable before, I think it's going to get even more unpredictable over the next 12 months. And one thing that I've been thinking about and recalling was back in early April. You'll remember during the leadership review campaign, a group of 19 former Conservative MLAs came out with a letter endorsing Kenney. And they really laid out a lot of potentialities over the next 12 months. And their argument being, we need to get behind our leader if we're going to come into this election with the strength that we need to defeat Rachel Notley. A few things that they outlined were that, a leadership race can take months. It could drag out through the summer. Ideally, they'd want to do it in the fall, but that coincides with the federal Conservative leadership vote on September 10th. So there's a conflict there where there might be volunteers, a lot of resources going into the federal leadership campaigns. If you push it into October, you're looking at installing a new leader within just a few months of a potential election, and only giving that new leader a little bit of time to fully staff all of their offices, to lay out a direction, lay out a mandate for the newly led party, and put together a budget and a throne speech in time for February, which would be right before the election. So it's a really tight timeline, and they do not have a lot of runway, especially when you consider right now where how much of a head start I think the NDP has squeaked out in terms of election readiness at this point in time.
Now, we're still at the day after the night before. There's still a lot of time for this to take shape, but already there's starting to be some speculation about who may be in the race to replace Jason Kenney. I know former Wild Rose leader Brian Jean already has kind of put his hand up. Danielle Smith, former Wild Rose leader and former radio host, is holding a press conference Thursday morning to announce what I assume will be her intentions. Ashley, are any other names at this point contenders or people that could put their hands up? Are there any cabinet ministers who may have designs on this, or are there concerns that they could be seen as too much a part of the Jason Kenney era?
I mean, like you said, we're so soon after the announcement that there's all sorts of names that are floating around, whether it's someone like Doug Schweitzer, who ran for the UCP leadership originally, or someone like a Nate Glubish or a Layla Ahir, who has been a critic of Kenney, or a Travis Taves. I do just want to say that I think if Kenney says that he plans to run in the leadership race, I think that could change who among the sitting ministers would also consider running. Like, I think he does have a close circle of advisors, and I'm not sure if they would want to run against him if he expressed interest in the leadership.
Yeah. Now, what's been the reaction like to this? I know the both of you are gobsmacked, as you said. We'll send another $1 to Rick Bell at the Calgary Sun for using his favorite word. Lisa, you were getting some reaction on Wednesday evening. What was the feeling related to the numbers for Jason Kenney and his announcement that he was stepping aside as leader?
I mean, what I was hearing was shock and surprise. I think a lot of people expected him to squeak out a narrow victory or something between 50 and 60%, but to continue to hold the reins and want to be the leader of this party. So I think there was a lot of surprise across the board.
You know, for me, I was sitting in my workspace at home. We're all working from home still for the most part. I know that the both of you are at the legislature, but my internet cut out as soon as Rick Orman started like right at that moment. And so I'm scrambling and I'm looking at trying to get to my phone and look at my phone and pull up Twitter. And I did not expect it, as many other people did not expect the result to be where it was. I think a lot of us, maybe a lot of people out there were believing the accusations that were being put out there about some funny business with ballots and assumed that the number would be much higher. And then some of us believed that, you know, Kenney's never one to be counted out, and he's been able to pull victory from the jaws of defeat and has been able to manage through a pandemic and some economic issues. And to be honest, I thought that because we were at a point where the economy was rebounding, the price of oil was getting better, the budget was balanced, that party leaders may have put that behind them. What was the sense from the NDP? I know that the opposition has taken a lot of glee, I get the sense, in really laying the hammer to the UCP over the last few months. It seems that our inboxes every day are full of press releases that even when there's a decision that they agree with, the NDP is very much trying to take the UCP down a peg, that the decision didn't go far enough or it's too late or anything like that. What was the reaction from the opposition to the word that Kenney announced that he was stepping back as leader for a new leadership race?
The NDP will be holding a press conference this afternoon, and I think it's very telling that the description of the press conference that we've gotten so far is that it's about showing how united the NDP is and how ready they are to govern. So I get the sense that is the step they're taking right now, is to try and paint themselves in contrast to the fractured UCP party, that they are a united group ready to govern. I do think that they will have to wait and see who ends up leading the party, because it will If it is an outsider who comes in, someone like a Brian Jean or a Danielle Smith, or even a Rona Ambrose, who I know the political scientist that Lisa spoke with had mentioned, I think that changes the NDP's game a little bit when compared to if it is someone who's already a sitting cabinet minister, or if it's Jason Kenney again. So I think they have to wait. But right now, their focus seems to be on projecting that they are a united front, while the UCP is not.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know there's a lot of moving parts to this, and the story is still developing even as we're speaking. We'll let you get back to your days. Lisa Johnson, Ashley Joannou, thanks for joining me.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, Dave.
That's it for this episode of Under the Dome. Don't forget you can find all past episodes at edmontonjournal.com/underthedome, and you can hit that subscribe button on YouTube. I'm Dave Breakenridge. We'll see you next time.